morning. This is You're Doing It Wrong with Mark Henderson Leary and my good friend Brad Freyer. How are you this morning?
You're doing it wrong.
What did I say? I said
you said we're not doing it wrong. This is playing to win.
Oh, this is playing to win. You're right. Okay.
We're winners.
I was doing. That's the second time I've done it wrong while saying that.
You're doing it wrong.
I am doing it wrong. This is Playing to Win with Mark Henderson Leary and Brad, who's correcting me so rudely. When is it rude to correct somebody, and when is it appropriate?
Oh God! I mean, that's just a conversation I have with my wife on the regular. I don't know. In my mind, I've always been the kind that's like, hey, if I'm doing something wrong, tell me, because I'd rather know than not. Yeah. But there's a lot of people that don't want to know that they're wrong. So that's a good question.
Well, there's a lot of reasons why people don't want to know they're wrong. None apply to me, of course, because I'm egoless. I'm a relentless pursuer of the truth, and at all costs, to be honest. And certainly the least of which would be any of my ego or any bruising that could happen there. People who might know me might have a funny look on their face right now, but the pursuit of truth, of being willing to do that. Do you find yourself restraining yourself from correcting other people, or are you let it go? You restrain?
Oh yeah. I mean, I more now than I used to. I used to be very, very quick to point out errors and flaws, be it big or small. And I think part of that is a function of what we do for a living, right? I mean, we get paid by companies to tell them what they're doing wrong and to help them fix it. And so,
or is it the other way around? Is it because we couldn't shut up about correcting people, and they said, "Well, put this guy to work"?
Yeah. And I think it. I think it. Whether that's the reason or not, I have been told historically that I need to stop telling people what they're doing wrong, and when I'm not at work, I need to not be at work. Yes, so I have been working diligently. It's an active pursuit of mine not to be critical, and to be very slow to respond. And so a big thing for me now is when someone says something that I want to respond in a critical way, I'll tend to say, you know what, I need to chew on that. Let me think about that. So that it gives me time to process and think about, okay, is this something that needs to be said, or does it not? And it's, I still don't always do it right, obviously, but it is something I'm conscious of, at least.
It's interesting because I'm going to say some very academic stuff, in that I believe that those of us who are sensitive and detail-oriented are good diagnosticians. You need a sensitive device that can pick out any inconsistencies in the patterns and point something out, which is a tool used intentionally for good things when someone has a need, which goes to the idea of correction, which is very similar to coaching. There's a parallel. Coaching and that kind of thing is opt-in, right? Somebody says, I have a problem. I would love for you to help me with it. Okay, cool. Yeah. But those of us who are programmed to do that diagnostic activity and pick those things up, we don't really snap that there's a switch. We should turn it on and off. And that sometimes people want it, some people don't. And people are just shopping at the grocery store, and they're like, hey, I didn't want your feedback. I'm just getting some Cheerios, man. And so that's the hard part. So then the part that I find is interesting is asking myself, does this need to be corrected? And I'm always like, well, of course it does, in my mind. That's not how you pronounce that word. There's an R in there. So
I got corrected by a stranger on pronunciation. And we were in where were we? Fredericksburg, I think. And I was reading the history of Fredericksburg to some friends, and I said the name of, I can't remember, maybe it was what the town was originally called. I can't even remember what the word was, or maybe the group of settlers that it originally founded. And I was reading it out loud to a group of friends, and somebody, a stranger standing next to me was like, you pronounce it such and such. I was like,
well, I can imagine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. A lot of foreign languages show up in those parts of the world. Is like, slight pronunciations, some Czech or some Russian or some German, something like that.
Czech.
Yeah. The Czech will always get you.
And the what was it? What was it? Yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyway, we were talking about productivity.
We were talking about productivity. I'm happy to dive in there. Did you have a certain direction you wanted to go with that?
No, I mean, we prior to us going live, we were just talking about what drives us, how to stay focused, but also the reality of how times have changed, and maybe it's how we've changed more than how times have changed. But I was sharing that when I first got into entrepreneurism or my own business, there was a tendency. I had a lot of my grandfather in me. My grandfather, self-made man, worked hard every day of his life until he died. And literally, he died in his mid-90s, but he worked until he physically could no longer work, which was probably in his early 90s. In fact, I worked for him for a couple of years, and he was in his 80s when I worked for him. And he had an office back in the accounting department, and he would oftentimes fall asleep at his desk in the afternoon. And sometimes some of the staff members would come and ask me, "Hey, would you go check on your grandfather?" They were afraid he might have died at his desk. So I'd go in, "Hey, Pop, you all right?" "Oh, yep, just resting my eyes." But
he didn't die at the office, did he?
No, he did not.
Okay,
good. Boots off. But the tendency for me was, if I'm not the first one in, if I'm not the last one out, if I'm not putting in, 9 or 10 hours a day in the office, then I'm not being productive.
Yeah,
right? I'm not working. And, in hindsight, those hours were not all productive hours. Right? There was, for me, I tend to work well in the morning because I low detail orientation, high energy. So the first 5 hours of the day are typically the most productive for me. After 2:00, my productivity goes down substantially just because, being tired and, you give a crap factor starts slipping. So then the question becomes, if your belief system is you have to be in the office to be productive, then you just sit in the office from 3 until 5, just piddling, right? Pretending to work, kind of grinding through, doing research, whatever. And so the question is do you need to be doing that? Are you more productive if you give yourself a break? If at 3:00, if you're done for the day, can you just go home? And I guess the other question is, if you know that you can go home, if you've given yourself permission to be done when you're done, are you more productive in the time that you're there, knowing that if you get everything done that needs to be done, that you'll let yourself off, that you'll give yourself a break?
There's a lot to unpack there, of course, because you're making fun of me because I always say that.
No, I rambled for a while. So
no, it's good. So there's lots of things that I could dive into, but one that I start the conversation with, at least from my side, is that when I sold my business, I was coming from a world of the typical entrepreneurial time management system, which was, I'll do that after this thing I'm working on right now. And I've got 3 priorities to do today that I'm going to do in a minute because I just checked the email. And so I'll do that a little bit later. I'm just going to stay a couple minutes longer and knock all this stuff out. And next thing you know, it's 9:00 and somehow none of the priorities are done. And that's kind of every day. It was this assumption that there was infinite amounts of time, abundance of time. It's just going to come. We're going to find it a little bit later. We're going to get a little earlier. We're going to do it on the weekend or something like that. And it just created this feeling of chaos. I sold the business and I had a very chaotic world at that time. And so I had a lot of things to do to transition the business fully out into no longer existing and move things in. And I would have like a list of 7 priorities in a day. And I would get not distracted. I would be the time was taken away from me due to other things, other family obligations and other things. And I would find myself with okay, well, this is the 7th thing. Well, maybe I can't get all 7. Maybe it's just 5. Okay, well, maybe it's just 4. And then I'd be like, okay, it looks like I'm going to have 1 solid hour of productivity, and I think I can get 1 thing done. And yeah. I did that for, I don't know, weeks, 5, 6 weeks. And after that 6-week period or so, I just looked back and I thought, I cannot believe how much I've gotten done. when I had really the focus on priority and I had no illusion that I could just add things to the list. I had to just cut off and cut off and cut off. That scarcity of time created so much focus that I got what I wanted out of it. So I do have experience that this is really the case. And there are times when things do build up, times of abundance. We are in times of abundance for many businesses. I mean, I still every once in a while hear somebody say something like, "Oh, 2021 was so terrible because it was, just a hang around." I'm like, well, actually, 2021 for a lot of people was an amazing year. 2020 was an amazing year for a few people, actually, but most of the people in my world experience a great deal of abundance and lots going on. And so this idea of prioritization is very, very difficult. And so we find ourselves trying to just burn more and more time and do more and more work. And that idea of abundance and the infinite capacity of time mentality is causing an awful lot of burnout and frustration and difficulty in morale right now. Do you see any of that?
I have, yeah. I mean, certainly there is, the people who really, the people, I've seen a lot of organizations who struggled from March of 20 through the summer. And then Q4 of 20 started to feel some momentum, and then 21 has been a great year, right? A lot coming at them, but that product, that push to get everything done. It's interesting because the other piece to productivity is self accountability, right? So even though as entrepreneurs we may have let ourselves off at 3:00. Whenever we got everything done, there was also those days where I remember sitting up in bed, at 10:00 prepping for the next day, because I just didn't get it all done. So I was just like, what, I still have to be working. And so I think you have to, to your point, know your priorities, know what has to get done, and be self-accountable to getting it done, and not necessarily. So I guess the two sides of that coin, right? Not living by the clock, right? I'm in at 8, I'm out at 5. If I'm done early and I have a light day, I'm going to go home at 3. But if I got a lot to do, I might end up working until 9 or 10. And so, during those times of high cotton, like we are right now for some businesses, where there's just a lot going on, I think you have to continue to remind yourself of the fact that it is, a time of abundance, and to reap the harvest, and to continue to gather, because there'll be a time where you get a break, but I think you do have to find balance. You do have to once again let yourself off the hook.
Yeah. So every time somebody says the word balance, I dive in on it because I profess to hate it. I hate it a little less than I used to, but I definitely do love to.
Why do you hate?
On it.
From what do you hate? Do you hate the concept, or do you hate that people are seeking it?
I think it's leveled as an admonishment for being to something. Like, you're not balanced. You're not smelling the roses. It's a criticism, and extremely ambitious people get it levied at them as, you're working too hard, you're doing too much.
But is it a function of ambition that causes that? Because I would contend that maybe it's not a function of ambition. Maybe it's a function of lack of focus or lack of perspective.
Well, so what I don't have a problem with it. When somebody says balance, I usually think they're onto the right track, and so I say, well, can we substitute the word healthy? Can we say like we
Isn't that just semantics though?
You're wrong, and I'm right, and I don't need your feedback right now. It's all in the matter of the definition, and some of us have wider definitions than other people, and so the healthy definition is when you are getting the most out of the system optimally. And I'm going to argue that balance, it can be balanced and broken. It can be balanced and unhealthy. You can balanced diet does not mean that you are living so what do you need? Some people need very imbalanced diets. If there is no cash in the bank, we need to put all of the weight toward the side of the organization that's going to get us cash. And so balance I think it just means, let's level it out. I think that when I say the word healthy, I want people to ask the question, what is health? Where are we now and where do we need to move to? And so sometimes you're trying to change the chemistry of your organization, your life, your world. And so the health aspect of this is, how much vitamin D is healthy? Is it a balanced amount of vitamin D you need, or do you need a lot more vitamin D because you have a tremendous vitamin D deficiency? Now go.
So I'm going to argue that semantics, because I think when I look at balance, I do look at balance from it being healthy, right? Because not everybody's balance is the same. So,
Agreed.
everybody doesn't need the same type of balance. Some people, hell, I think there's probably people who need more balance on, to your point, working a little bit more. They swung too far the opposite direction. And so, balance starts with your goals and your vision and what's important to you, right? I had someone tell me recently that there's 3 typical pillars for growth at any given time of your life. Financial, professional, and personal.
They're spiritual.
And gosh, dog it. I'm gonna have to look that one up and get back to you.
Is there one involving food? There needs to be one involving food.
Well, the message is that depending upon where we are in our life cycle, those priorities change, right? At certain parts of your life, you're going to be very focused on financial, right? You want to just hoard, you want to grow your net worth, your savings, you want to make as much as you can. There's other times where you're more concerned about your professional growth. Like you're less concerned about the money you're making and you're more concerned about development. Or
there's like health, wealth, and happiness or something like that. You can choose to it's almost like a triple constraint.
It's like you've heard, there's in the retail world, do you want it done good, fast, or cheap? Pick 2 or 3, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think in life you're going to have different, depending upon where you are in your life cycle, you're going to have different priorities. For me right now, I would take a pay cut to do something, grander with a longer term payout. Whereas 10 years ago, I wanted it all, and I wanted it right now because I was trying to build up a nest egg.
Yeah, for sure.
And certainly there's been times where it's, I just want it to be about me for now.
Yeah.
Right. And my family and yada, yada. And so I think your balance is attributed to your perspective and constantly having that self-reflection of what's important to me. Right? Because productivity is about doing what you need to do, not what everybody says you need to be doing.
For sure.
It can change.
We've talked about 2 sort of competing concepts, and that is, and these are mixed in. So I don't have enough. There is scarcity, and it is my job to resolve or remedy that scarcity issue. Then there's also there is an abundance issue, and I've got to figure out how to optimize that. And they're very different approaches, or very different. Yeah, different approaches, different everything about them, and they're both very, very difficult. Although the scarcity one is a little more straightforward. A lot of times there's more like just do the work. And when you're in the abundance mindset, it is when is it enough? And it's very difficult to wrangle those questions. And the question that comes up in some of my clients is particularly the very, very fast growing ones. I'm thinking one in particular is very fast growing, and the question they are sort of socializing in their organization is, at what cost? We can. At what cost? And so it's a really the question. It's a brilliant spiritual question that requires a lot of work to have been done to know whether the cost is too high, because otherwise you're like, I don't know what is the cost, and why would I pay that?
Where are they according to their goals that they had set?
Well, they're very close to them, and either above them or below them, depending on how you look at it. They're overperforming on pretty much all measurables. Yeah. So here's something, another interesting concept I just recently heard, and I've never heard it put this way before, but they said, too often people aren't focusing on their goal.
where they are and their goal and where they've come, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
typically looking at goal versus ideal. And ideal is the horizon, right? And so you've got this company that is hitting their goal or maybe even exceeding it. And rather than looking backwards at, oh my God, look at how far we've come, look at the amazing things we've done. Now they're starting to look at the horizon, right? Well, what else? Where else can we? What else can we? Oh, how far can? And the problem with the horizon is what? Have you ever tried to catch it?
Yeah. Well, this is very similar to the concept of the gap in the gain.
That's exactly it. I just saw that last week.
Dan Sullivan has been talking about that for a long time, and he and Ben Hardy Dan Sullivan has been but the book is now out, brand new. The book is brand new out, and it's called The Gap in the Gain, and it's he and Ben Hardy. I assume that Ben Hardy wrote most of it, but I don't know. And so, this idea of when we have a big goal and we make a small amount of progress on it, all we see is the gap between us and the goal. We don't acknowledge that the progress we went after, even when we set the goal of that progress, when we go, awesome, we did exactly what we said. Still not there, still not at the horizon, still not at the goal that I did. The 10-year goal is still 9 years away. We still suck. Yeah,
but the thing that I heard in his message that was different, right, is because you're talking about where we've come towards the goal. But
and that's what we want to acknowledge. We want to give ourselves credit for the progress we actually made, but we rarely do.
But really keeping an eye also on that goal versus looking past the goal and looking at the ideal, which is the big vision, the dreams. Because I mean, how many times I know I have done this, and I'm sure you have too, and I know we know tons of people who have. In fact, I had a conversation with a person last week who makes amazing money, is extremely successful at their role. And I was talking to them last week and they're like, what I really want is this, I want that $1 million a year job and I want this and da-da-da-da. And I was like, okay. I said, let's put things in perspective for just a minute, can we? And they were like, yes. I said, understand that where you are right now, you are probably in the top 2% of earners on the planet, right? You're making more money than 98% of the population. Appreciate where you are for just a minute and ask yourself, why do I want more, right? Is it sheer ego? Is it because there's something that I would actually do with that additional income? Why are you looking at why are you chasing the horizon? Because I promise you hit that $1 million mark, then you're going to be like, hey, well, I want to make 10 million a year. At what point are you happy with hitting your goals and looking back at what you've achieved versus always chasing that horizon? And chasing the horizon is what creates depression. It's what creates negative self-talk. It's what creates anxiety, because rather than being happy with where we are and achieving the things that we've achieved, we're always looking at the horizon. And no matter how hard you chase, no matter how hard you run towards the horizon, you are never going to catch it. It's always going to be moving away from you.
Yeah, for sure. And like Ali commented, it was a wonderful visionary. It was so ambitious and high intensity. Thanks for the comment, Ali. But he also runs a business that's designed to teach people about this kind of stuff as well. So it's he manages wealth for entrepreneurs. So his business is about like, let's set some clear goals. Let's actually get rational about this. And he's a big believer in making sure that we have the not wasting a bunch of time and energy on things that sound good but actually don't meet our goals. And so it's easy to a lot of times to preach this stuff, and it's hard to live it, because in the moment you just get going and you're caught up in your energy of the habits that got you here. So being in a high performance organization, being a high performance person actually makes it really hard to ask those questions of what is enough and why am I doing this?
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that you can't continue to set lofty goals or have BHAGs or whatever, but make sure that you're focused on the goal and your growth, not what's beyond the goal and the what if, because that's I mean, especially in today's world of Instagram and social media. I mean, you open up, Instagram and all of a sudden you see story after story of, a kid who, day traded for 6 weeks and now he's a billionaire. And you're like, well, I just want that. Yeah. A, half of that's probably BS, but B, there's one person out of every million that lucked into or happened to find the right appointment at the right time to make that happen. Right. How many 30-year overnight successes do we look at and go, oh, I just want that? I mean, everybody wants to be Elon. Everybody wants to be Jeffrey. Everybody wants to be, Bill. But you got to be happy with what you've achieved, and you got to be happy with where you've grown, right? Because every day you are perfection. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, and you got to appreciate that. You got to appreciate today.
Yeah, that's a hard thing, and I think that's the spiritual side of this. That is, the universe was perfectly configured to put you exactly in this spot, exactly this time, with exactly what you've got, and so the universe is sort of, you can't argue with it. It did it. They say about your processes in your business are perfectly designed to produce the outcome it did. The system of your business. Every outcome is not accidental in the sense that, like, there's no magic, right? There's nobody kind of waved a magic wand and 4 + 4 suddenly equaled 2. No, that was not how it worked. So when you got that outcome, everything was there to do that. And so it's difficult to find that humility that you are where you are. And the way I like to say this is that there's plenty of knowledge and experience and processes to get you from point A to point B reliably, consistently, and we can buy them, we can subscribe to them, and we can do online courses and that kind of thing. Here's the problem. You're not at point A, and you don't know where you are, and you need to know how to get to point A from where you are. And so if in truth that's where you want to be, because you might actually be closer to point B than you think, or you might not want that path at all. There might be a totally different thing that you want to do. It really requires a lot of self-awareness to understand that everybody is sort of making an assumption about point A. Every time you sign up for a self-help learning process, anything, you hire on a new company, and there's a process for selling. There's a process for producing the product. And where are you? How much training do you need? Do you have the endurance? Do you have the knowledge? Where are you relative to point A? Because everybody sort of assumes you're there. And so don't do that. Find out where you are and live your life. And there is a book that I need to go now that I think about it. I want to track it down. That's basically page after page of individuals and their accomplishments, and the whole thing is designed for you to sense the comparison. Oh, you want to be, a composer. Well, compare yourself to Mozart, who was writing this at age 6 or whatever, And then, oh, you want to invent something. Well, let's compare, to somebody else who did this by age 3. And the whole thing is just a comparison after comparison, just to kind of bring the humility to you. That you will always not just be outdone a little bit by somebody, but there's somebody who's got 100x higher performance than you in every aspect of your life. So just let go.
One of my favorite lines is, "There's always a bigger boat in the marina."
For sure.
Right? No matter how good it is. So stop looking at the other boats with lust and desire, and be happy with the boat that you're on.
So, we're almost out of time. So I guess I want to try to tether this down, because
good luck.
I do think you have 2 things to figure out. And it starts with understanding what your version of health is, and be honest. And we talked about this, about feedback and honesty, and you're going to have to give yourself some feedback, and you're going to have to understand your edge. And I'll bring in a total random thing. So the idea of understanding what your edge is, and that is where you are growing, where you are a little bit out of your comfort zone. That is only for you to know and decide. But be aware that you are fooling very few people outside of yourself. So when you try to work on an edge that is not yours, if you try to get from point A to point B and you're not at point A, you may think you're fooling people, but you're not. So people will see, and if you can be honest with yourself with what you need to develop and where you need to spend your time, people will see and trust you because they know you're self-aware and they have confidence in you that you know what the truth is. And so that might mean you have to make more phone calls. You might have to work more right now. Even though your friends are making way more money than you, you might have to do work to develop yourself that other people around you are not. And the flip side might be true as well. You might already have all of what you want, and you might be letting it slip away. And so be aware, assess what you want, take the time and make sure you get that space. And all of this comes back to so much about purpose, which you cannot find purpose if you don't take that space to self-observe, get some feedback, and see what's really going on, and find some way to see a mirror through your coach, through your family, through your spouse, through just meditation. And that is our time. We'll see you next week.
Well done. That was a good one.
Thanks, Brad. See you next time, bud.